In 1951, a man was said to have appeared out of thin air in the middle of New York City. He was killed shortly afterwards, but when officials searched his body, it left them wondering not so much where he came from, but when this week we share the tale of Rudolph Fentz, the man out of time. Ha ha ha. On a warm summer evening in June 1951, the bustling streets of New York City were suddenly brought to a complete standstill. Onlookers were startled when a young man, said to be in his late 20s, seemingly materialized out of thin air. This man, it was stated, looked entirely out of place and time. His hairstyle was said to be about 70 years out of date. His face half obscured by mutton chop sideburns, and the style of his clothing strikingly similar to fashions prevalent in the mid-1800s. Witnesses reported that he seemed distressed and confused by his and that he suddenly flew into a panic and ran. Less than a minute later, he was lying dead in the road after being struck down by a passing car. This man's sudden appearance would have been strange enough, but when officials at the morgue searched his body, they found a whole host of bizarre items on his person, which baffled local authorities. These included a copper token for a beer worth 5 cents, bearing the name of a saloon which was unknown even to the older residents of the area, a bill for the care of a horse and the washing of a carriage, drawn by a library stable on Lexington Avenue, which was not listed in any address book. Approximately $70 in old banknotes, business cards with the name Rudolph Fentz listing an address on 5th Avenue, and finally, a letter sent to this address from Philadelphia, dated June 1876. Even more intriguing was the fact that none of these items showed any signs of aging or degradation, particularly the letter, which did not look anywhere near its supposed age of 75 years. The case was assigned to NYPD Captain Hugh Rime of the Missing Persons Department, who used much of this information to try and identify the strange man. His first port of call was the 5th Avenue address, listed on the business card, but this turned out to be a dead end. The owner said that he had never heard of Rudolph Fentz. To make Rime's task even more difficult, Pence's name was not listed in any current telephone or address book. His fingerprints were not recorded anywhere, and no one had come forward since his death to report him missing. Nevertheless, Ryan continued his investigation, and after much searching, found the name of a Rudolph Fentz Jr. in a 20-year-old telephone book dating back to 1939. As it turned out, Fentz Jr. no longer lived at the listed address. Instead, it was now occupied by a middle-aged couple who, in fact, did remember the previous owner, saying he was a man of about 60 and that he had worked nearby. After his retirement in 1940, he'd apparently moved away, though they could not say where. Even so, This lead proved to be invaluable, as it allowed Rhyme to track down the bank, which had facilitated Fentz Jr.'s business account. From there, it was found that he had died 5 years earlier, in 1946, but his widow was still alive and currently living in Florida. Ryan was able to contact her, and when the conversation turned to matters regarding Fentz Jr.'s father, she simply said that he had disappeared in 1876, aged 29. He had left the house one evening for a stroll and had never returned. So, what happened to the original Rudolph Fentz? Did he accidentally travel forward in time by 75 years, leaving his young son behind to age naturally over time and die before his reappearance in 1951? We're not so sure. During the 70s, 80s, and 90s, this story was reported almost exactly as it is told as fact today. That was until 2001, when a folklore researcher named Chris Alp investigated the case and, being unable to find the original story reported in any newspaper at the alleged time of the incident, and no record of a Rudolph Fentz having ever existed, concluded that the people and events described within were all a work of fiction. However, he could not find the source of this fiction. Another researcher, Pastor George Murphy, claimed in 2002 that the original story was published in a September 1951 issue of Collier's magazine as part of a series of short stories entitled "I'm Scared." Murphy's investigation had led him to conclude that the author was none other than the renowned science fiction writer Jack Finney. So the strange case of Rudolph Fentz was finally put to rest as nothing more than an urban legend, or so everyone thought. No original copies of the Fentz episode have ever been found, and Finney died in 1995 before he could be questioned about it. Another twist emerged in 2007 when a researcher working at the Berlin News Archive found a newspaper article from April 1951 reporting the story as it is told. Today, this would have been 5 months before Jack Finney's short story was said to have been published. What's more, other researchers have come forward, claiming to have found evidence of the real Rudolph Fentz and proof of his disappearance in 1876, aged 29. So could the Jack Finney angle, as purported author, be a well-placed cover-up in order to disguise the truth as a work of fiction? On the other hand, why has no one come forward with examples of this newfound evidence? The likelihood is that the story of Rudolph Fentz is completely fabricated. That said, many are far too quick to dismiss this case on the assumption that time travel is impossible, when in fact the opposite is true. Some subatomic particles travel both backwards and forwards through time, as a matter of course, and in the microscopic world, it has been physically demonstrated that time travel, particularly forward time travel, is supposedly experienced by Mr. Fentz, is absolutely possible. This is not mere theory but scientific fact. A person could travel forward in time just by moving faster than those around them, although they would have to move at phenomenal speeds in order to observe any difference. So, if there is any truth to this tale, how could Rudolph Fentz have traveled 75 years into the future, when the quickest method of transport in his day, steam train, would have been no faster than 60 miles per hour? Did he unwittingly slip through a crack in time during his evening stroll? This sort of phenomenon is not unheard of. Throughout history, there have been many accounts of people experiencing sudden and unexpected time slips, though they are usually deposited back in their own time, relatively unscathed. However, until we find an intact copy of the original Jack Finney story, or someone comes forward with evidence proving, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that Rudolph Fentz did in fact exist, or even a clipping of the original news report that was said to have been at the time of his death, the origins of this tale, whether fact or fiction, will forever be in question.